Well, thank you very much and welcome. As we say in Arabic, Salam alaikum, and peace be upon you is something very important when you talk about nuclear war, of course. Nuclear war, for those of you who are young, who are born in the 80s or 90s, you probably don't remember how much it was a threat for, like, I remember being born in the 1970s. In my childhood, we lived under the constant threat of nuclear exchange between the Soviet Union and the United States. And I'm sure, Sheikh, you have the same age as my father. All of your life, you went through the history of this threat, which is not simply, when the first atom bomb was used on Japan, and the second also on Hiroshima and then Nagasaki, Joseph Stalin in Russia and Soviet Union, the leader of the Soviet Union, he at first dismissed this. He said, well, the Americans can destroy a city with one bomb in 1 second. I can destroy a city with my artillery in 1 day. And yes, it may be factually true, but in reality, everybody knew at the time that the nuclear war, nuclear weapons were changing completely the terms of war. And for those of us who are old now and remember how it was, believe me, when suddenly in the 1990s, with the collapse and end of the Soviet Union, we thought that this big danger would be gone. We were wrong, unfortunately. And when I wrote my first book about how we deal and how we survive with what I believe is coming, and it has already started, with the economic collapse on a global scale, I had to write a little paragraph on nuclear war and said, yes, there is the possibility of nuclear war, but I hadn't really thought about how you cope with it. And so it was a very short paragraph, and basically I dismissed it a little bit as either something that you cannot survive, or, well, I will then deal on a later scale. And incidentally, a year ago exactly, I started to think about this, and I was contacted by a gentleman who has been the specialist for nuclear, bacteriological, and chemical warfare for the French gendarmerie, the elite gendarmerie, the GIGN, le Groupe d'Intervention de la Gendarmerie Nationale in France. And he contacted me and said, well, I like your books, and maybe we can write a book together. And so we decided and I researched this topic also because it was, of course, fascinating and very interesting for myself. And this led to a book, which I have here. In fact, this is the first copy. Well, it's not a copy of the book, but clearly this is the last. I am still putting my last little changes of it. And it will be published in a few weeks, in a few months maybe. And of course, the topic is how you survive to nuclear, radiological, bacteriological, and chemical incidents, which can include warfare, of course. So here I will focus only on the nuclear part. And clearly, this is something that anyone who watches the news today, honestly, has to. It has never been that possible since 1962. The last time we've been so close to nuclear war was 1962, when, during the Cuba crisis in October, between the 13th and I think the 19th of October of 1962, the United States Navy conducted an act of war against Cuba by making a blockade, and the Soviet sent ships to break that blockade. And during that very tense time, there was a day when one of the Russian submarines almost launched an atomic torpedo on an American nuclear carrier. And fortunately, the second in command of that submarine stopped the order and said, well, no, we need to be sure, because in fact the submarine was attacked by an American destroyer, but they were not real depth charges. They were duds. They were not real ones. But we were very close to a nuclear exchange then. And so today, what do you need to have a nuclear war? Well, first of all, you need three things. You need first of all the nuclear warheads and the vectors to bring them to your objective. You need the opportunity, which means that you need to have some advantage or some rational or sometimes irrational reason, but at least a reason that seems opportunistic to use them. And we'll talk about that. And of course, you need the political will. You need the willingness to use them. It's not something that you launch by mistake. It's something that you decide. So let's first look at what are the countries today, the organizations that have nuclear weapons today. Well, clearly they are the big military superpowers. It's obviously the United States of America. It's obviously Russia, which have thousands of nuclear warheads, much less than they used to. At the height of the Cold War in the end 70s, early 80s, United States had 16,000 warheads and Russia had almost 40,000. That's a huge amount. Today, this is much less, but they're more precise, more advanced in technology. You have, of course, some smaller players like United Kingdom or France, which have about 200 warheads each. You have China, which also starts to have not only more warheads, but more importantly is the ability to project them with missiles, submarine-launched missiles. Of course, you have India and Pakistan, which each has about 100, and the vectors for local delivery. You have North Korea now. You have Israel, which has between 70 and 400, depending on the sources, and has capacity to launch them through cruise missiles and submarines. So it has the capacity to hit any part of the world. And of course, there is a big mystery on Iran. Is Iran developing nuclear weapons? We don't really know officially, at least. And then you have some other countries which could have atomic weapons very quickly. And these countries are Japan, South Korea, which have the engineering, the manufacturing, and the technical skills to build them in a few months, very quickly. And you have Saudi Arabia, very interestingly, which has a deal with Pakistan. They funded Pakistan's nuclear research and nuclear development. And there is a deal, and actually right now, there's some concerns, or certainly in the news, we're talking about the ability of Saudi to receive missiles with nuclear warheads from Pakistan as part of this deal. So that's a few countries, but there are countries which may have political willingness in some scenarios to use it. The questions also that remains open is, are terrorist organizations able to put their hands on nuclear weapons? And so far this has been extremely unlikely, and this is technical, but every nuclear warhead has a signature and has a sort of fingerprint, and the material which they are built is extremely tracked. And of course, the scenario means that if a terrorist organization gets a nuclear weapon, it means that someone gave it to them. And so it's fairly easy to find out who gave it to them, and this is probably why this has never happened so far. But you cannot rule out the possibility that this may happen eventually. Now, I think the most interesting part is the political will. Who has the ability and decision capacity to say, yes, now we go to nuclear war? Because obviously it has not been used since World War II. And the mythological impact of nuclear warheads and nuclear bombs has been huge because of movies, because of, in the popular culture, we always have seen movies of post-apocalyptic worlds like Mad Max and others. And the mere use of nuclear weapons is something extremely, extremely scary for all of us. So any country who would start to use them would be immediately seen as extremely evil and extremely beyond any reasonable aspects. And in fact, how nuclear weapons were to be used, at least officially, since the end of the 1940s, have always been, there's no country who said we will use nuclear weapons first. They always said we will only use them if attacked or if our survival is at stake. That was the official reason, because now we know, because of course some archives have been declassified, especially from United States and also from the Soviet Union, that there had been plans to use nuclear weapons immediately as first strike. And most of these plans came from the United States. In fact, in 1952, the United States had a real plan of attack to completely obliterate the Soviet Union without warning, as a surprise attack. And this is what, by the way, in the media, in the movies, they always said it would be the opposite. They always said, oh, Russia will attack us in a surprise attack and things like that. Russia never planned to have surprise attacks on the West. They planned to use nuclear weapons in a war immediately. That's true. But they never planned to attack with nuclear weapons as a surprise attack.